Samantha Stewart, and I'll be interviewing Sam Stewart, my grandfather. He graduated from the University of Arkansas in spring of 1943, and when he entered the war, he was a second lieutenant in the Army Infantry. And now he's going to tell you all about himself and how he got into the war.
Well, when I went into the University of Arkansas in 1939, war was the furthest thing from our mind, but after a couple of years, you know what happened. The Japanese attacked Pearl Harbor, and our life was shattered, and we were all of a sudden plunged into a war, so we all started getting ready for it. So I entered the ROTC, and that's Reserve Officers Training Corps in colleges. Many colleges and universities have that program, and even today many high schools have it. But that's basically training for officers to enter the service. And when I graduated in 1943, I went on active duty almost immediately. And almost immediately after graduating, I went in on active duty. And we had a period of training to get you ready for combat because the war was already well underway. They were fighting in North Africa, fighting in the South Pacific, and parts of Europe. So we had to get our training in as quickly as possible and be ready to get over there and get along with what it was that we were learning how to do. And I actually finished my training in August of 1944 and was shipped over as a replacement officer. Second lieutenants were what we called very expendable because it's not the colonels and generals who lead troops into combat. It's the second lieutenants and the first lieutenants, the sergeants, and occasionally a captain. But these are the first people to go. So they needed second lieutenants very badly, and I went over. I got orders to go overseas as a replacement officer in August of 1944. And I went by ship on a ship called the Ile-de-France.
How long did it take to get over there?
It took us 7 days, which is pretty fast because we went unescorted. It's a very fast. It was a ship that they had used for pleasure up until the war, and we took it as troops. We had like 18,000 people on this one ship. We landed in Scotland. We got off the ship, got on a train, went to Southampton in England, South England, and got off the train onto another boat and went across the channel, English Channel, and landed on the coast of France. So I got there sometime in September. And of course, you know, we all kept saying the war will be over before we get there, you know. It's taken a long time. And D-Day had been in June already. See, June the 6th, we had landed troops in France, and they were moving quickly, well, not as quickly as we'd like, but they had already taken Paris and were moving on towards the east. But I went to a replacement depot. They call them repel-depots. Replacement depot, and from there the divisions send back on who they need, how many second lieutenants they need, and the sergeant, blah, blah, blah. And I was selected to go to the 79th Infantry Division, which was already in France in a town called Univille. And we had spent, of course, several weeks on a ship and on trains and in replacement camps and whatnot. and we still hadn't seen an electric light yet. You know, everybody was living with candles and flashlights, and all of Europe was blacked out. And I might add at this point, two of the most coveted things in a soldier's life was a candle and toilet paper. The only toilet paper you got was in your ration, and you'd get about 4 sheets like that every day. And candles was the only light we had. They would provide you light in your foxhole, and they would also warm you, because in small confined places a candle will warm you up pretty good. But anyhow, I joined my division in early October of 44, and they had just pulled back into a rest area. This gives you a few days to get acquainted with your troops and whatnot, and I was assigned to a 81 millimeter mortar platoon, which is one of the platoons in a heavy weapons company. See, an infantry battalion has a headquarters company. It has 3 infantry companies and a heavy weapons company. And the heavy weapons company has a headquarters platoon that has 2 heavy machine gun platoons and 1 81 millimeter mortar platoon. And that was my assignment. And I have some pictures of those here that you might want to take along with you and show what an 81 millimeter mortar looks like. But in any case, we continued our combat from then was into Alsace. Alsace is a section of Germany and France that has been debated between Germany and France for many, many years. And of course, at this time, the Germans had control of Alsace, Alsace-Lorraine, they call it. And that was part of our first combat, was to take over that area, which we did in a matter of about a month.
Those mortars, like, how'd they work?
Well, a mortar, it's a smooth tube, actually. You know, it's a tube that sticks up in an 81 millimeter is approximately 3 inches. I think it's a little more than 3 inches. Mm-hmm. And the shell has fins on it, and it has a warhead, and it has a trigger nose on it. And you drop the shell into the tube, and it hits a plunger down here, which fires it off, and it goes out in a high trajectory and angles over on hopefully the enemy.
How far should these things
they would. We had 3 different types of ammunition. One is what we call HE light, that was HE heavy, and smoke. The HE light was fragmentary type, and it would fire about 3,200 yards. The HE heavy had a delayed action fuse, and if you fired it like into the top of this house, it wouldn't explode like the HE light. The HE light would explode the minute it hit, the second it hit on the house. But the HE heavy goes on through the house and explodes in the basement. So that was important in Germany and France, where many of the troops were dug in. They were in basements, so you'd fire through the tops and drop your shell in there, and it had delayed action on it, would explode in the basements. And the smoke, of course, we fired to blind the enemy to what we were doing, would shield him off with smoke grenades. But that's basically the 3 kinds of ammunition that we had.
Like, how many men were there in your unit? Like,
well, in my platoon, we had 3 sections, and each section had 2 squads, and each squad had 1 weapon. So each section had 2 squads and 2 weapons, so we had a total of 6 mortars in the platoon. And we never, of course, you never had full strength, but the squad would normally have like 7 people in it. You were luckily if you had 4, because replacements didn't catch up to you fast enough. But you would have a gunner, you'd have a platoon sergeant or a section sergeant, and then a squad sergeant, and a gunner, and a loader, ammunition bearer. So you would have about 7 people in each squad, so like 14 people in a section.
What were you? Were you just like?
I started off as a section commander, and my job for the most part was a forward observer, because these are things like they're almost like artillery. You have to know where they're landing. If you don't know where they're landing, why, you're firing blind. So I would stay up with the infantry company the rifle company that we were supporting. I would stay up with them, and they would tell me where they wanted to fire, put, and I had a map, and I would call my guns and tell them where to place their fire, and give them an azimuth to fire on. And they knew how to do that. They'd line their guns up on a certain angle, and I'd tell them what the distance was, and by the distance they could set their sights and the angle of fire and drop it out. And of course, you fire like 3 rounds, and one of them short, one of them over, and the next one in the middle, and you can say, okay, that 3rd round was one we want, and then they would lay down a base of fire on it like that. So we supported the infantry company with our mortars.
Did you ever get real close to the enemy?
Oh yes. I mean, we could see the whites of their eyes. That was on one occasion, and that was in a little town called Hagenall, and there was a little river that ran between us, and they were on one side of the river, we were on the other side of the river. But the bridges were out, and they couldn't cross without a boat. The river was only like 30 or 40 feet wide, but we had it covered on one side and they on the other, but we could sit on our side and we could see them very plainly on the other side. And we did a dab of sniping too, you know.
Was it ever real scary?
Oh, well, yes, very scary, but you learn to cope with it after a while. It's just the way it is, so you might as well live with it. Some of the people, we had problems with some of our people that couldn't take it. We call it combat fatigue. It's when a guy gets so scared he can't handle it, and he just sort of curls up and won't go. So you got to start talking with him and try to show him that he's letting his buddies down, and all these people are counting on him. So after a while, he'll just see it your way and get up and go. If he doesn't, you have to send him back through medical channels.
Did you get to write letters home often?
Yes. Well, I wouldn't say often, but only when you had a chance to stop and spend a night someplace in the quiet, because normally you'd be under artillery fire at night. And as I say, you didn't have much light, so you had to take whatever opportunity you had to send a letter home. And I have here, I just ran in today into a Christmas card that I sent my mom and dad in 1944, I believe, if I can find it. But anyhow, it had the division crest on it, and it had the Merry Christmas and Happy New Year in French, which I'm sure my parents didn't know. Of course, I didn't know either. But anyhow, that's, well, here it is here. It shows a GI in a foxhole. And I mailed that on Thanksgiving, 1944.
Does it have something on the back?
In order to, yeah, it has writing.
Is this out? Or?
Yes, you can open it. You may have to open it from the other side.
Oh.
But it has just a note to my parents. And explaining what the French meant. Of course, I wasn't sure myself. Yeah, you can open it up.
Oh, no.
We were, the troops, you seldom knew where you were going, Somebody upstairs always directed where you were going and when you were going to get there and what you were going to do after you got there. So us guys down in the line, we had no idea where we were going, what we were going to find when we got there, or what it was we were supposed to be doing after we got there, until the fact that we got there, and then our company commander would say, okay, you're going to hold this sector, and you're going to hold this sector here, you're going to do this, and tomorrow morning at 0600, we're going to jump off and go over that hill and take that village down there, see. That's how we found out. But prior to that, we didn't know. We just sort of in limbo, taking care of our men, seeing that everybody had their clothes and their shoes, and and you had GIs who wouldn't change his socks for a week, and he'd come down with bad diseases of the toes and whatnot. But anyhow, the first day out, we spent the night in a wheat field on the side of a hill, and it started snowing.
Yeah, I suppose you can't tell by the weather.
It started snowing, and we were just laying in little prone shelters with a raincoat over us. And we woke up the next morning, and we had snow covering us. And three of our officers, now heavy weapons company, you have quite a few officers. You have 3 officers in your machine gun platoons, and we had like 4 officers in the mortar platoon. You have 3 in the company headquarters. But 3 of them went down to the village. We had an aid station. They went down there to pick up some aid supplies, medical supplies. And this town was shelled by the Germans while they were there, and we lost all 3 of them. That was just the first day after we had reconstituted our whole company with new officers. So the first day we lose 3 of them. So when you're going to get replacements for them, you may never get replacements. But in any case, it just shows you how fast they go, and each of these were second lieutenants. But they'd gone down to pick up medical supplies. Each platoon has its own medic. And, they carry a little morphine, but mostly Band-Aids and bandages and this type of thing that they can treat wounds quickly. But you had to resupply them every once in a while. We came by a battalion aid station, we'd go get extra supplies for them. But then we joined the 2nd French Armored Division. And they were wild men. I mean, we would go into a town and button up for the night, and silence is the greatest thing in the world in combat. Don't let them know where you are. And in the middle of the night, the 2nd French Armored comes roaring into town with their tanks. And they have chickens in their tanks with them, and all this thing. They come in shouting and carrying on, and immediately the German artillery starts pouring in there. Because they know what's happening too. So that was one of the problems we had, and of course I was very new to it at that time, and all I could do is try to keep my head down. But after a few days, you get accustomed to it, and you know what's going on, and you're sort of loosey-goosey and let it happen. And talking about food, we had 3 kinds of food. For the most part, when we were on the move, we ate K rations. You'd get 3 boxes of K rations, 1 for breakfast, 1 for lunch, and 1 for dinner.
Were they really big? Or
They were
I know
they were about that long and about so thick. I'm trying to think of something that they'd compare to. How about the cassette for your video cassette, that container, that's about the size of it. In that container you had, for breakfast, you would have a little can, they called it scrambled eggs and bacon. It was a gray mass, and if you let your imagination wander, you could probably say it was eggs.
Yeah.
And then you would have a drink. It might be a hot chocolate, or maybe even a little powdered coffee. And then you would have your 4 or 5 sheets of toilet paper, and amazingly, 3 cigarettes.
Yeah.
If you didn't smoke cigarettes, maybe you could trade it to some guy for his toilet paper, say. But
So it's kind
yeah.
of good not to smoke that.
then your lunch would probably be cheese, a little can of solid cheese. And when I say solid, it was solid.
Yeah.
And then you would have a little package of lemonade, 3 cigarettes, and if you were lucky, 4 more sheets of toilet paper. But then for supper, you would have maybe what they call a little hash or something, another little can, and in the same system all the way through. You'd have this and 3 cigarettes and toilet paper. And that was what we traveled on, and we would break those down because, the pack was bulky. We would just take the cans out of it. Or you always had 3 crackers in there too. 3 crackers, that was your bread. But we would toss those into our gas mask kit. Most people threw their gas mask out, but we used the container that we carried it in to haul our food in. And so we'd break these packets down and put the food in the gas mask kit to carry along with us.
What'd you have to carry along with you? I mean, what'd you have with you?
Well, you had to have an entrenching tool, normally a little shovel or maybe a pick. You had a backpack that would have your shelter half in it, which is a half of a pup tent. You would have your mess kit, which, just a container with a lid on it, and a knife and a fork and spoon. And then maybe a change of underwear, dry socks, and whatever other warm clothing that you had, raincoat, something like that, field jacket you carry in your pack. And of course your weapon, your ammunition. And in mortar platoon, everybody had to carry at least 6 rounds of ammunition. They had 3 in the front, 3 in the back, and then one guy had to carry the base plate, one had to carry the tube, and one had to carry the bipod. And each one of these pieces weighed about 45 pounds. Plus your own weapon. If you had an M1 rifle, that weighed over 8 pounds, and a carbine about 5 pounds. But you had extra ammunition. You had your belts full of ammunition and whatever you're going to use to fight, because nobody's going to bring this stuff up to you. Bedroll, you may not see your bedroll for weeks.
Where'd you have to sleep? I mean, you said you slept.
That's what I say. The officers all had bedrolls. We had a big canvas bedroll that had blankets and whatnot in it, but that was carried on the battalion kitchen truck. Battalion headquarters company had a big kitchen truck that when we had 3 or 4 days in one place, they would cook us a hot meal, which usually turned out to be warmed up sea rations. That was the other type of ration we had, was a sea ration, which came in a can, and it was like a can of pork and beans or a can of hash, that type of thing. And they would come up and open a lot of those, throw them in a big pot, warm it up, and then hot hash or pork. But they would also bring the officers their bedrolls up, usually dump them off in a mud hole. Whatever was going, it was always raining or snowing, and you get your bedroll and it would be soaked and you couldn't sleep in it anyhow. And nothing itches like wool, and everything was wool.
Did you get a bedroll?
Yes, I had a bedroll. Huge thing, but as I say, you only saw it maybe every 2 or 3 weeks. They'd come up and dump it off, and usually you spent whatever time you had trying to dry it out so it would be sleepable the next time you had it. But otherwise, we just slept with our raincoat and our other clothing we had. We put on most all the clothes that we had. This was wintertime. We put on everything we carried. And get too hot, we'd take a little bit off. But we'd sleep in holes at night. You never go to bed without digging a hole and getting in it.
Were you ever in any big battles?
Yes, one of our biggest battles, as far as firepower and this type of thing, was the Rhine crossing. When we crossed the Rhine, this was in March of 45. We had artillery from the North Sea all the way to Switzerland just about, and it pulverized the other side, and really it wasn't as bad as, once you get in the boats to get over there, but usually, as my luck would have it, the motor wouldn't run in the boat, and we had to paddle. And the Rhine River's pretty swift, and we missed our landing point. We got lost in the middle of the night. It took us about 4 or 5 hours to find out where we were supposed to be.
Not a good day.
Not a good day, no. But this is getting along toward the end of the war, This is March, and then we still had April, and I think the war finally ended on 8th of May or something like that. But we had no idea what was going on, what the stage was. All we know is move forward to the next objective and do the best you can. And food we supplemented with whatever we could pick up along the way. Chickens. My radio operator would watch an old hen until she laid the egg. He'd get the egg and the hen, and we'd have them both for supper. So that's how we ate, whatever we could find. And a lot of the basements, we were told not to eat the food, but you'd find good sauerkraut, also canned meats. We ate whatever we could find.
Like, how much ground did you cover? I mean, from where you started?
Well, my division landed at Cherbourg, which is western France, and we finished the war in Czechoslovakia. So that's pretty far piece. I don't know. But once the war was over, our job wasn't finished. Some of the divisions prepared to return to the States and go on into the South Pacific because the war over there was still going on.
Were you in Czechoslovakia when you found out the Germans had surrendered?
No, actually, we found out before we got to Czechoslovakia that they had already surrendered. But we went into Czechoslovakia as sort of an occupation troop into the Sudetenland, what we call it. That was German-controlled area of Czechoslovakia. So we went in there and assisted the Czechs in repatriating the Germans out of there for a period of several weeks. Then we came back to Germany, but then we had to administer the displaced persons camps. They had thousands of displaced persons in Germany, Polish, Czech, Jewish, Russian.
How did that work? What did you do there?
Well, we collected these people. They would turn themselves in or in some cases we would liberate them if they were in enclosures. You know, some of them were in jail or gulags or whatever they called them in those days. But when we overran the area, these people became free. Well, you know, what's a Russian going to do in the middle of Germany? He's free all of a sudden. He doesn't have a ticket back home. He has no place to go to eat dinner that night, place to sleep or whatnot. So we set up camps for these people. We took over the German casernes, which were army posts or military posts. We would take those over and bring the people in there and provide them cooking facilities or kitchens, place to sleep, medical care, and eventually we would provide them transportation back to their country.
So did you do anything else other than the displacement people?
Yes, we supervised the organizing of the German government. We would select people to run the police force, you know, and try to get people who weren't Nazis. We had a system whereby we could check out people through their, to determine if there were Nazi sympathizers or whatnot. And we would pick out people that we hope were sympathetic to our side, and we'd make a guy mayor of the city and police chief and have them then start organizing their own government, but we supervised the organizing of the government.
Was this West Germany or East Germany?
That was West Germany. East Germany was under control of the Russians.
Oh, okay.
Of course, you know, we were also allies with the Russians, but once the war was over, the Russians sort of buttoned up, and that's how the Iron Curtain came down, and they didn't want anything to do with us. They wanted to run their own show. So, but we were, you know, nose to nose with them at the East German, West German border, and the border of Czechoslovakia and whatnot. That's a long story in itself, which has just recently been resolved.
Little birdie told me that you got some special awards. And
oh, well, one of the combats we had was during the what we call the Bulge up in Belgium, Battle of the Bulge. German counteroffensive up there in the middle of winter, and we were on the south side of that in Alsace, in a town called Hatton, and its neighbor called Ritterschaffen, and that was right on where the old Maginot Line. Maginot Line was the French defensive line. They hoped would repel the Germans from coming into France, but it never did. They just went around it. But anyhow, we were right on that area, and we put up a very stiff resistance there, our unit did. And we withstood the attacks of about 2 or 3 German divisions, and we won the Presidential Unit Citation.
oh.
Thought we did a good job. We didn't know the difference. We were just trying to survive.
So, like, when did y'all get to go home? When did you get to go home?
Amazingly, you know, as I say, I didn't get over there until like September of '44, and we had a point system whereby people, by months in combat and whatnot, they got to come back first. If you rolled that along, you got to come back first. And some people were just chosen to help do a job. And my division was transferred back to the States to prepare to go to the South Pacific. But I was pulled out to help reorganize the government and to repatriate these displaced persons. So I didn't get to come home until March of 1946. So most of my compatriots were back in late 1945, and I got back in March of 1946.